All right. So today we have Jenny Tse with us. She is the owner of Sipping Streams Tea. She also wrote a book about her journey in creating Sipping Streams, but also like learning about tea and teaching us about tea. So she's here to talk to us about that book and her experiences writing it. It's called The Essence of Tea, The Transformational Journey of a Tea Connoisseur. And so without further ado, here is Jenny.
Hello, thanks for having me. So I'm not really sure how this goes, but that's fine. So like you might need to prompt me on like what you want me to talk about exactly. But this is a copy of my book. Did anyone get to read the book yet or seen it already? I didn't know if anybody here has seen the book or read it.
I'm into chapter 1.
You're into chapter 1. It's
Yeah.
really easy to read.
Yeah.
So if you're like really hardcore into being like a tea master, it's probably not the book for you, because I wrote the book in a way that would be really accessible to my mom. So I'm Chinese. I was born in Hong Kong. My mom and dad are immigrants, and English was technically all of our second languages. So I didn't learn English till I went to kindergarten, but English, like I'm fluent in English. I am not fluent in Cantonese, or I don't even read Chinese. But my mom, she loves reading books, but she's always saying, I can only read the books that a middle schooler would read. If it's too technical, I don't understand it. So even though it goes into some scientific information in here, I try not to be too, like speaking like a doctor. I want it to be really easy to understand and digest, because the whole point about writing about tea and answering people's questions is the accessibility for anyone to really just understand the overall concepts of tea and why it's so healing. And so many people are very interested in how I started my tea company, but also many people are very interested in my life. And so before 16 years ago, before I started my tea company, people are already asking me, they're like, that's so interesting how you grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and that you have all these interesting experiences. My friends in Idaho, I went to college in Idaho, would ask all these questions. They're like, you really need to write a book about your life. I'm like, well, okay, I'll maybe one day. I don't even know how to write a book, right? Because this is the only book I've ever written. So then people are like, oh, your tea journey is very interesting. Like, do you have a book on that? Do you have a book where you have all this information that you tell us? Like, I want to have a reference. Like, no, I've never even written a book. And actually, at the high school that I taught at, I was a math and science teacher. So no, it's like, I'm not a writer, really. And people did like all the stories that I would tell about tea and the information. So that's why eventually, from encouragement from other people saying, oh, it's so easy to write a book, you should just do it. So the teacher in me was like, okay, let me take a class on writing a book. And for those of you in Alaska who might have like listened to other Alaskan authors before, there's actually book conferences in Alaska. I think it's down in Homer or something like that, where they get a bunch of people who are interested in writing or have been an author before. I think they have an annual conference down in Homer. So there are resources out there if you're into writing, or people, encourage you to be a writer. And I took an actual online course, which is the 5-day course on how easy it is to write a book. And so the teacher me was like, okay, they said, I can do this. So I guess I can do this since they told me I can do this. And it's kind of been my attitude with most things, from starting the tea company to doing my own taxes for my business to writing this book. Like, I take a class and they go, it's easy, just follow these steps. So within 1 week, I was very hesitant. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to write a book. But I'll take this class and let's see how it goes. So they had me start off with an outline, kind of like in your English writing class, you need to have a theme. What's the point of your book? And then you break out that theme into points, right? So for me, I was really good at writing research papers. So writing something creative is very hard for me. Like, I'm not going to write fiction. Fiction is like, like a story that's not real. Nonfiction is the facts. So I'm like, okay, I definitely can't write fiction because I'm just so scientific. So I'll write a book that is about facts, but isn't too boring, like all the research that I've read about tea. So we'll put them in stories, and then I'll write in some information about myself and maybe how I got into tea, because these are all the questions that people ask me. So I'm brainstorming and thinking about, like, what's my theme? My theme is the overall purpose of how I got into tea, which is the same reason why almost everyone gets into tea, is overall personal development. Whether it's development of relationships, whether it's development of your personal wellness that you're interested in, whether it's just knowledge. A lot of us read because we're interested in learning. I'm like, okay, I can do this. All right, this is a very simple, very broad theme of personal development, okay, personal growth. And so when I broke up the chapters based off of the interesting things that people told me about or asked me about in my personal tea journey when I started drinking tea. So going back, if you read my book, you'll notice that I did not grow up being a tea drinker. Yes, I'm Chinese, but our family didn't really drink tea. So I've been drinking black coffee since I was 4, and I actually like the taste of coffee. I remember my grandmother, she'd bring us C's candy from Hong Kong, and it would be coffee candy. And I remember even picking the little lock to open the cabinet where she locked the candy so I wouldn't eat it all. So then I'd just steal like a piece of candy a day. I know, I was a naughty kid. So like, and I put everything back so you didn't notice that I stole the coffee candy. But I love the taste of coffee. Fast forward into transitioning into tea. When I started drinking tea, and I think it's in the second chapter of the book, Starbucks versus Red Rose. So I don't know how many of you grew up on Red Rose tea with those little figurine things. I was gifted a box of Red Rose tea from a friend who had leukemia, and she had to drop out of college and move back to California because she was not doing well. So she didn't just give me a box of Red Rose tea. She gave me everything in her pantry, and that's how I ended up with the Red Rose tea. And then and I was like, oh, okay, I'll drink tea because it's cheap. And because I had to pay my student loans back, I started drinking tea at Starbucks. Instead of my $5.26 drink every day, because I'm a broke college student living off of loans and spending money like crazy because I don't know how to, save money, or, like, I'm not financially smart, okay? Like, my parents didn't really teach me anything other than you should save your money and you should stop spending it all. But me, the rebellious black sheep of the family, picking locks, stealing candy that I'm not supposed to have, I always spent whatever I had. Right? Even if I didn't have it, I didn't actually own any of that money if it was a student loan. So then I'm like, oh no, it's my last year of college. I gotta stop like spending a crazy amount of money at Starbucks. I should pick the cheapest thing, which was tea. And so with that, so many people came up with all these questions to ask me because I was graduating in athletic training, which is sports medicine. So they're like, oh, are you drinking tea because it's healthy for you? Like, you're a personal trainer, right? Like, it cures cancer and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if it cures cancer. I'm drinking tea because it's cheap. So hence all these chapters in the book are questions that people had for me. Like, I heard tea cures cancer. So we talk about that in the book and how the science of the different polyphenols or antioxidants work for giving you all these different health benefits. I also had lots of friends who told me that I could do everything. They couldn't do anything. But for some reason, I was a workaholic. And they always looked at me and they're like, that's amazing, Jenny. You go. You be a double major and take 19 credits semester and work your butt off and never sleep. I don't know how you do it, but you just do that. And so I have a chapter about burnout because through having my tea business. So I think I wrote my book maybe 4 years ago. I forgot when I actually finished the book. COVID years, we get lost in all the COVID years, how many years ago it was. But anyways, I had lived through a lot of different ups and downs of being an entrepreneur or learning how to be an entrepreneur. So I was thinking about these memories of like what people would tell me about myself, which was very fascinating because hearing the feedback of how people perceived me also influenced me on how I educate people about tea. It's how people see me is how they're going to receive me. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, like, I'm Chinese. I forget unless I look in the mirror. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm Chinese, got black hair. I'm like Asian face, like no nose kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, I forget that people think that I'm Chinese, which I am Chinese. But like, I see myself more of like a white person because I've hung out with a lot of white people. Or then when I'm in the athletics department, I feel like I assimilate and I blend in really easily with whoever people are. And so that's why the very first chapter is called Are You Drinking Tea Because You're Chinese? Which just sounds so racist. But I mean, I just accept it as like people being curious. I think of it as a wonderful thing that goes, what does it mean for tea to be Chinese? I never thought about that. I never thought about that because I wasn't a tea drinker growing up. So I think about the history of tea. Like, where did tea come from? How did the origin stories of tea transform our world today? And I honestly did not like history growing up. So the worlds of tea and understanding tea, where it's from, its origin story, my background. Oh yeah, Grandpa did that weird Chinese thing every morning. Not just the weird Chinese exercise, which ended up being Tai Chi, and not just walking around collecting sticks and doing art or whatever, the weird Asian family. But he did this weird thing with these vessels every morning. I didn't know what he was doing with water, and I don't even know. Turned out to be the Chinese tea ceremony because I didn't pay attention to what my grandparents did every morning. I just knew they do that thing in front of the TV where they slowly move their arms. Turns out to be Tai Chi. They're like walking around the neighborhood picking up sticks. Apparently, my grandfather did like this diamond willow type of walking sticks, like all of this like interesting creative stuff. He also did Chinese watercolor paintings. But anyways, I remember one day my sister was like, I dare you to drink that weird thing that grandpa always makes every morning. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll figure out what he's drinking. And I liked it. I liked it so much that I would drink up all of his tea. I didn't know it was called tea. I didn't even know what tea was. I drink it up, and then I was like, oh no, he's gonna know that I drank out of it. I better just put it away. Like look like I just cleaned it up for him. So like I would wash it and everything like that. And as I learned more about tea and I reflected on these memories, I was like, oh my gosh, you're never supposed to put soap and water in a Yixing Chinese tea ceremony set. Like you're never, I didn't know that. I was like, I wonder if he ever noticed. I wonder if it ever tastes like soap. Like, I wonder, I don't know. My grandfather's already passed a long time ago, but I was just like, so as I was learning more about tea, I was learning about these interesting things that I did when I was a kid. Didn't know tea was already integrated in my life as a little kid because I didn't know what's called tea. It was that weird Chinese clay thing. I don't know, the weird grandparents thing. And then I washed it out, and you're cleaning out the aged flavor of the Yixing clay pot. And I was like, oh, well, already too late. Now I know better, but I didn't know. I just, because I was stealing his tea. So I was wanted to clean up and put it away as if like one of my parents came in and just took care of it or something. So it's very interesting how much like writing this book really gave me perspective of my own identity and what it meant for me to be born in Hong Kong, growing up in Fairbanks, Alaska since I was a baby. People would ask me all the time, what is it like to be from Alaska? I'm like, I don't know. We have dog mushing. We've got snow, but we got 24 hours of sunlight. People were so curious about my upbringing. So through this, I kind of write a little bit about my upbringing in Alaska. I talk about my parents' restaurant during the 80s. And and so many other things that had to affect who I was to give me the lens and perspective that I have now. And the healing part about it was hearing the stories later because of my curiosity of tea. So I would tell my parents about what I learned about tea. I'm like, oh yeah, there's this tea called pu'er, and it's like really old and aged. And they would be like, oh yeah, your grandfather drank tons of that stuff. That's what you drink every day. And I'm like, oh, oh my, there's a story about that. I didn't, didn't ever tell my grandparents what I did with their Yixing clay pots, but then the conversations at the dinner table will be like, oh my gosh, you're never supposed to clean those out. Like they're heirlooms. I'm like, oh, well, now I know. So the more that I learned about tea, the more I shared it with my family and friends at the dinner table, and it opened up conversations. It built community around the dinner table because for my parents, they had a very hard upbringing. My father fled from China during the Japanese invasion, got fake papers, then like says he's from Hong Kong, but they had to flee during the war. And so my childhood, my grandparents who drank tea and did Tai Chi every morning, they never wanted to talk about their past because they were very affluent. They were very wealthy before they fled and they had to leave everything. So growing up, we were, just regular class people, not what my grandmother was used to when she was growing up. And she'd always be so angry and then never talk about the past. And our parents said, never ask your grandparents about the past. So I never asked them about the past. And then my parents, I knew they were really poor. My mother used to steal vegetables from the neighbors. She never had a pair of shoes until she was 14 and had to go work in a factory. And she had dropped out of school. So I realized that I could never ask them about their past. I didn't know them. So dinners were usually very short-lived conversations. We'd be arguing. My sister and I would argue about stupid stuff. And so my parents would like not want any arguing and didn't want to talk. So you have this awkward silence sitting at the dinner table. And pretty soon you're like, can I watch Wheel of Fortune? So that was our bonding, was watching Wheel of Fortune, eating dinner. But when I started learning about tea, since the dinner table was awkward again, except I didn't have my sister to argue with after college, I just started telling them what I learned about in tea. Like just randomly, almost like talking to myself. I'm like, did you know that, tea is from China and that there's all these different tea farms and there's all these different kinds of tea? And my mom would go, oh yeah, your dad's from a tea growing region. He knows all about that. My dad, who didn't drink tea when I was growing up, the same father. And I was like, interesting. You never told me about this. And then he would go in the back and pull out his really expensive pu'er cake that he got from an uncle that's worth over $5,000. And I was like, what? So it was very interesting because I'm like, you have a rich uncle? What? So like the more that we talked about tea, the more I start to build connections with my family history. And so I was like, wow, if this can be done for other people, if this can be done for my family, what does that mean for other people? Must be so many stories that people have around tea. I started noticing that when I worked at the physical therapy clinic. I'd be drinking my Lipton tea bag and somebody walk out and they're like, oh, you don't drink coffee? I'm like, oh, I drink coffee. I'm just starting to drink tea now. I'm learning about tea. So they have Lipton in the back. I'm just bringing this out. And people like, oh, I remember drinking sun tea when I lived in Georgia with my Aunt Sue. And we'd always have a tea time at night on the porch. And I'm like, interesting. So every time I brought out a cup of tea, different patients would be telling me their stories. I'm like, there's something to this whole community thing with tea. Fascinating. Because I'm not the only one who's building more intimate relationships with my family and friends over tea. There's other people who have that story. So that's why in the chapter about community, I talk about that. But also reflecting on tea time. What does it mean for someone to make themselves a cup of tea, right? And so that's why I talk about mindfulness and the Tao of tea, the way of tea, what that means. What did that mean for my grandfather? my grandfather had already passed a long time ago before I got into tea. So I couldn't ask him those questions. But I know from meeting other Chinese tea drinkers who do the Chinese tea ceremony for themselves, they would tell me about why they would have tea. That was just good for their soul, good for themselves, or good for conversations. And then I hear about other people who have like a tea time, right? Like an English style tea time. Like they always have tea at the certain time, they grew up with it. I'm like, huh, interesting. It's like they're making space for themselves, like a break, like a snack time. And if you go to England or India, they always have a tea time and they're bringing out all the treats and everything like that. So I'm like, wow, there's another component of personal development, of like making space for tea. So I talk about that in there too, and how healing it is when tea, not just physiologically, so I get into the science behind tea. I heard tea cures cancer, right? I talk about the different components of tea and what makes it so healing. But besides thinking of it as a supplement, because tea is technically the second most consumed beverage in the entire world. So besides that, it was very fascinating to hear people's healing, personal development, reflection, growth, self-identity with the medium of tea. And now we're thinking of it as a more holistic approach. And that's why the book is called The Transformational Journey of a Tea Connoisseur. I could say I'm a tea connoisseur. I've won 11 international awards for my teas. People call me a tea master, but just to go back to that, I don't consider myself as a tea master. I'm always learning, always growing, seeing how people drink tea, manufacture tea. There's different ways that people drink tea, and that's their own personal preference. I am never going to tell you to, sorry if some of this makes some people like shocked. I'm never going to tell you not to microwave your hot water if you don't want to, like if you want to. If that's how you make your tea, fine. Who am I going to tell you that you're doing it wrong? Because the reason why we get into tea is for our own personal reasons. And yes, it might not make championship grade tea. That's fine. But if that's how you want to drink it, or you just leave the tea leaves in there with boiling hot water into delicate Japanese green tea, and you just leave it in the bottom of your cup with no strainer, and that's how you want to drink it really strong and robust, fine. That's how you enjoy your tea. We're all on our own journey of personal development, and whatever that means. And sometimes that personal development has to do with enjoyment, enjoying it however you want, whether you want it iced, whether you love your Lipton tea bag. There are just some things that I wanted to bring awareness in the book that I learned along the way, that there was different qualities of tea. I didn't know there were different qualities of tea. I didn't grow up as a tea drinker. And there's so many tea drinkers out there who just drink tea because they hear it's good for them. So it's almost like they just drink tea because it's their source of water. But at the same time, they didn't know that there's a better way to steep tea. I don't want to say there's a wrong way. I want to be careful about that. But there's steeping times for tea. There's amounts of tea that you put in. There is, you know, how much grammage you should put in. There's lower grades of tea. But is there a wrong way to drink your tea? Unless it makes you ill. You should drink tea however you want to drink it. So in the book, it has some basic information about how to brew tea, how to steep tea, and it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just the standards for if you want championship grade tea. But in the end, you are the connoisseur of your own life. However you want to enjoy your tea, however you want to make tea, that is for you. So for me, I don't gravitate towards fruit blends, towards tisanes. I'm like a tea drinker. I like drinking my oolong teas. I'm actually having some yerba mate right now. That's a blend of coconut and some other stuff, and I don't even like coconut, but I'm always open. So this is a cup of tea I would not normally drink, but I appreciate the thoughtfulness of what other people might enjoy. So I have samples of all different types of teas that I don't carry or serve. And I try to be open-minded with my palate as a connoisseur to understand, what do people want when they gravitate towards a certain type of tea or tea blend? Is it for health reasons? Is it for caffeine? Is it for relaxation? What are the reasons why we drink tea? So today I'm having this coconut yerba mate something blend. I don't even know what it is, but I'm like, it's not bad. Because I also write in the book that it takes about 20 tastes of something to appreciate it from not revolting you from that flavor. So when you have something that's so unfamiliar in your memory, other than anything you've ever had, you're probably not going to like it. My husband is extremely picky, like a very, very picky eater. He doesn't really drink alcohol, like hardly at all, because he doesn't like the flavor of it. If he could, he'd just live off of Coca-Cola and mochas, okay? But he's learned, and he read that chapter in my book that I talk about 20 tastes to just barely appreciate something, just be able to withstand it, because it's something so unfamiliar. He's like, okay, all right, I'll give it a taste this time. I'm not gonna love it. I'll just take a sip, or I'll take a bite. I'll just try it, because I'm building, my palate to appreciate what somebody else appreciates. It's the same thing. So hopefully that was kind of like a good explanation of like how I or why I wrote the book. And then also going back to my journey of writing the book. So within 1 week, I wrote a whole outline. I wrote the chapter titles. I didn't write the whole book yet. And then within 6 months, I finished the book, because I just disciplined myself for about an hour a day to work on it, however imperfect it was, and then go back and revise it. So it was a very fast book to write, but granted, it's only 100 pages. And it's pretty big font too, so it's easy to read. But it gives like a really good overview about tea. What does tea mean to people? What's the history of tea? What's matcha? What's good for inflammation? It has a lot of questions about health benefits of tea, but it has also those overarching properties and qualities in the medium of tea that make it so holistic, in more than just taking it as a supplement with different components in it to help your body.
Hey, Jenny, can you hear me?
Yep.
I have a couple questions, just a couple of insights too. I think what you say about tea bringing people together is so interesting, because like tea has really brought my family together too, in the sense that the whole reason we started doing bees is because we were buying so much honey for our tea that we were like, it's more affordable to just buy bees and make our own honey. And the bees in themselves have then become a bonding experience for all of us. So I mean, that's really interesting how you brought that up. And then also like the process of making a cup of tea, right? Like there's something about filling the kettle, getting my honeycomb with the honey, knowing that it's my bee barf, that's my bee barf I'm using. And it's actually, I'm at the process now where I want to start growing my own tea, because it's just such, a thing that we do together every night. We make a cup of tea and have tea together every single night. And so I think that that's really, I guess I never thought about that. My question for you is, do you think how accessible you made the book is part of the reason why the book is so successful?
I don't know if I thought about that. I just know it was so impactful. Like my tea business, I guess most people don't understand how hard my childhood was with my parents. And a lot of it has to do with their own stuff that happened to them. And so being a kid, but being the oldest, and I'm Asian, so a lot of pressures on the firstborn child, which I'm the firstborn. Like we get nothing, not even an inch of anything. You make it on your own. Good luck with everything. And the most criticism is for the oldest child in the Chinese family. Because it was so powerful. It was like a one, more than one. If you can do more than a 180, but so impactful to my relationship with my parents. I was just like, there's no way. I didn't ever think my relationship with my parents could get better, other than me just letting them be. But the fact that they reached out to me like halfway in the conversations, like gave back in the conversations, when I thought I was just going to talk to myself, like, okay, sure, I'll do this thing. I'll share with, like, this is awkward, so I'll just start talking to myself, even if I have to. That they met me partway in that conversation was just like I almost like want to cry. Like every time I think about that, it was so powerful and moving to me that I was like, could this be something for someone else too, who could relate? And so I didn't think about making it accessible and it then becoming successful. It was because I care so deeply for my family, no matter how terrible my childhood was to me. And they didn't know. They're just parents. Nobody knows how to be a good parent. You could read a million books and then it's going to turn out the opposite, right? So um, that I just, for the love of my family and my friends and the people who impacted me, it was almost like I wanted to give back through the book. So, and to acknowledge them, that I see them, I hear them, and you were a huge influence in my life, almost like a thank you. And so maybe that's why it's so successful, is because it's very intimate. I mean, I've had criticism. I have really good reviews on Amazon, first of all. I was shocked. I looked at them the other day and I was like, whoa, those are really good reviews. I thought, because in the beginning, I got all these like tea connoisseurs who are like, this book is like, they'd write, not very good reviews. And they'd say, this is nothing about like the technical aspects of being a Chinese tea master. And I'm like, I don't think anywhere on the book, on the back, it said it was going to be like that. Like, I'm like, did I claim that it was going to be that? So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess it's not for you. That's not who I wrote it for. I wrote it for people who really want the intimate, holistic transformation, or that lifestyle that we as non-tea drinkers come to understand. Because there's a lot of non-tea drinkers that become tea drinkers, and it relates to them and their stories. Not everyone grew up in a tea drinking family. Helen, I think you did grow up drinking tea. I think you've told me before, but there's a lot of people like me who are like, where do I start? I didn't know anything about tea. And I don't want them to feel ashamed. I want them to be curious and encouraged.
Does anyone else have questions for Jenny?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to let you know that tea is important in my life as being English. And I love the sound of teacups being put out and people drinking tea, and the clink of the teacup on the saucer. And if they use sugar, then the clink of the sugar spoon on the saucer, and the sound of the pouring. And, it's just a very peaceful relaxation. And unfortunately, tea doesn't like me that much. But so I like to drink it, but I do have to try to be a little bit cautious about how much I drink. And I tend to drink a whole pot at a time. And usually my teas are usually with milk, but if they are different teas, then I'll drink without milk. When I was growing up, it was wartime, and just after the war, and we were not allowed to have sugar in our tea because the sugar went, there was a sugar ration, and the sugar went to making cakes, which could be shared with everybody, and not everyone was drinking tea. So I ended up not taking sugar in my tea. The other day I made a cup of tea and I thought, oh, I had some sugar that I'd used for dipping some strawberries in. I thought, oh, I might put some in my tea. And it was really good. I enjoyed it. And so, yeah, tea is a very much a social drink. It's the sort of thing you invite. I had an 80th birthday and I got 92 people to Raven Landing for my 80th birthday, and it was a tea party. And I had, every table had its own teapot. People got their tea from the side, where they had the tea available. And I don't remember if they actually poured the tea into the pot or if they had a urn or whatever. I don't remember, but we had all kinds of cakes and so forth, and bread and butter and scones, and just a wonderful spread. A musician who played the piano, and we had the St. Matthew's Church choir, and we had people singing alongside from my book. When I went to school, we had a songbook, and I still have it. So I photocopied some of the songs, and we sang the songs. And so it was a great occasion, and people keep reminding me of it. And that was 4 years ago.
That's amazing. That sounds so spectacular. What a good memory, an event, and something that you created for other people too, who are still talking about it. Yeah, the impact of that.
Yeah. Well, the teacups, we had the real teacups in every table, and we had real linen tablecloths and so forth.
So you were fancy.
Oh, Marvin,
we used a recipe for walnut cake that my mother had in her cookbook that came with the stove before the war. So, and that was really good. And the Raven Landing cook did a fantastic job of making it. And it has coffee in it, and a little taste of coffee, with in the walnuts. It's just perfect cake.
This is Joan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Joan.
Okay, I have a teacup and sort of a big saucer. And on the bottom, it says, made in occupied Japan, which my youngest son said, I would just really love that teacup and saucer. Does anybody else have something like that?
Yeah, I have a couple like that too. I don't even know where it is. I hid it from myself because I'm like, oh my goodness. Like it's really thin, very dainty.
Yeah, it's thin.
Yeah.
And
so
the saucer is like you could put a cookie or a small something to eat as you drink your tea. And then and what really shocked me was the made in occupied Japan, because I had to go look up my history to talk about or think about occupied Japan, because I don't know when my parents got that teacup and saucer, but I don't know that I was around a lot to find out.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't seen many of those. If I ever see them in like an antique store, I buy them right away.
Yeah, well, I think mine is probably going to go to my youngest son some point, because he sent me this list of things. Gee, I'd love these things from your house. And it included this made in occupied Japan teacup and saucer.
Oh, Marvin, I don't know if your speaker's on. Oh, maybe you're going to type it in?
I think he might be trying to figure out his mic.
Well, it's the mute and the unmute in the lower bottom left.
Marvin's got a different kind of setup than most of us, though, because
Oh, okay.
his computer, I think he's working on it.
Yeah. My computer does that too, because I have different mics and stuff.
Do you have a favorite teacup or teapot, Jenny?
Oh, I have it's not Occupy Japan, but there's this tea set that my grandma always used. So she would make it from this tea set that she got in Japan. And so I got it passed on to me because my parents were just clearing out their house. They're like, hey, who wants this stuff? And I was like, that's the teapot that grandma always drank out of. I still have it. In one of my moves, the spout got chipped. And I was like, no. And then like a lid got broken because they had cups with no handles and a lid. So they aren't the super old ones, but it did say made in Japan on the bottom. And so I still have that. That's my favorite. It just sits on the shelf. But it does remind me of my grandmother because she had tea a different style than my grandfather had tea. And they were married, but they just did tea differently. Okay, you ready?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me now? Oh, good. I spent a sabbatical um, at Scott Pillar in Cambridge, and every mid-morning, everybody, but I mean everybody, went down, stood around, and had a cup of tea, and anybody coming into town from Antarctic or wherever else, they would stop by, and it was a wonderful way of communication with your associations. It's so and it played a really important atmosphere for the entire institution. And that's a very, very British thing to do, of course. And it was all worked out so you were standing there for a while. You're not sitting around and lolling about. You're there for a business, it's pretty interesting.
And that was every day at the same time?
Yes.
Huh.
Yes. That was 1980, I think it was, when I was there.
That's so cool. I wonder if they still do that.
I think they do. I'm not sure. But the Scott Polar is the major institution of dealing with the Arctic and Antarctic as an academic thing. And so we had people coming in from all over the place. They just finished a stage in the area at the Antarctic, for example, or they were on an expedition in the Arctic, or I mean, it was a wonderful way to exchange information. So
That's so cool. They should do something like that here in Alaska.
yes.
Like a public school maybe, or besides just your lunchtime break or whatever. It'd be very powerful, I think. I know when I was in India, there was always tea time. I think tea time was 3 times. It was like before breakfast, you'd have tea. Sometime in the afternoon, and then before dinner, and then dinner was very late. I think dinner was like at 9 p.m. And you'd have like all these cookies and sweets and tea. It was like so much food. I'm like, I'm not going to eat dinner then. They're like, oh no, dinner's coming still. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I can't have this much.
Did they get that from the British? Because what happened apparently was that when tea came to England, Queen Victoria, who was pretty young at the time, enjoyed a cup of tea, and so she asked that it might be brought to her in the afternoon. And so that may have filtered back into India to drink it at that time of day. And so, of course, when I was working in London, somebody would make tea in the afternoon and bring it, you know.
Oh yeah.
And
You know,
we'd have a break.
tea has it's really a part of the history of Alaska, because the Russian American company was required to take to a certain place to sell their furs to China, and China was the source of almost all the money that the Russian American company had. And so what the Russians did was to buy tea, and they turned that into a very often used tea times and that sort of thing with the Russians, and it's part of their they've been doing this for centuries, and having a nice warm apparatus in your living room, and you could have a cup of coffee, and it would help keep the room warm, you know, the whole thing.
You talk about the samovar?
Yes.
Samovar?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, tea internationally is a big deal as far as Alaska is concerned. Even they weren't eating that much when the Americans came in. And one reason is that it was so good for the Russian American company was that they would get the bricks of tea, which is easy to transport, because before there was a Siberian railroad or any of that, it was all overground so to get to the markets, and you better have something that will last and not get turn sour, and that was easy to handle.
Yeah, and it wouldn't get crunched up either, like in the
Right,
transportation,
exactly,
moving it
yes.
around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people would break off little pieces of the tea, almost like a chocolate bar, right? So
Yeah.
I think we have,
Well, I've got,
oh, sorry,
yeah, I've got
one more question.
Well, I don't have a question. This is Joan, but I truly enjoyed the presentation.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, I came in late, but thank you. I enjoyed it too. I've got to go.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop recording now.